is Patricia Kathleen, and this series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas in an effort to explore the world of fasting from a variety of angles. This dialogue is meant to develop a more complete story about the information, research, personal stories, and culture in and around the science and lifestyle of fasting. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to check out our subsequent series that dive deep into specific areas such as founders and entrepreneurs, vegan life, and roundtable topics. They can be found on our website, patriciakathleen.com, where you can also join our newsletter. You can also subscribe to all of our series on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the conversation. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today I'm sitting down with Amanda Swaine. Amanda is a nutritional therapist, business owner, author, and fasting expert. You can find out more about her businesses, and all of the resources she has at nutritionistblend.com. That is nutritionistblend.com. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to climb through everything you've done. You have a book we're going to look at. You have a company with products. I'm really excited to climb through all of your expertise. For everyone listening, I will read a quick bio on Amanda before I start peppering her with questions. But prior to that, here's a quick roadmap for today's podcast and vodcast so you can follow along. We will first unpack Amanda's academic background, professional and personal story regarding fasting. And then we'll turn our efforts towards unpacking her book, Intermittent Fasting for Beginners, and some of the core axiomatic principles within that she offers her readers. Then we'll look at unpacking her company, and namely the products, the Fasting Plus sticks and fasting sticks, and what those offer in regards to the fasting lifestyle and practice. And then we'll wrap everything up with goals and future plans, different dialogues that Amanda has regarding the current climate and fasting and some of her personal narratives within that. Quick bio on Amanda as promised. Amanda is a nutritional therapist and a business owner specializing in intermittent fasting. She spent 2 years researching how to make intermittent fasting easier for more of us and invented Fasting Plus by nutritionists. Blend to stop symptoms in their tracks and help you achieve next level results. The fasting sticks have attracted many high-profile customers as both regular users of the product and seeking her one-on-one support of their own intermittent fasting plans. Since then, she wrote a book, Intermittent Fasting for Beginners, that launched March of this year in the US, Canada, and the UK, and continues to develop new solutions to support us all with more achievable intermittent fasting. Amanda, I told you earlier off the record that I had read your book this morning, and I cannot wait to kind of unpack that with you. However, prior to that, I'm hoping that you can offer myself and the audience a brief overview of your academic background, early professional life, and everything that kind of brought you to launching your website as well as writing the book.
Okay. So in terms of nutrition, I trained as a nutritional therapist as a second career. So I was in advertising for about 17 years, and it was just something I knew I needed to find a way to leave and find another career because I'd fallen out of love with it. Simple as that, really. When I was at university, I studied business studies. And I'd always, when I was sort of that age, leaving university, I'd always wanted my own business, but I knew I wanted to get real world experience first. So off into advertising, worked on some incredible brands, some incredible agencies. But I was also working on brands I didn't believe in. So there was an awful lot of selling things to people that I was just a bit concerned that they weren't fully aware of the danger they were, the damage some of those products would be doing to them in terms of health. So I was working on usual kind of products that you'd expect at sort of big agencies. So I was working on things like fizzy drinks, margarine, sugary cereal, none of which were, motivating me to get out of bed in the morning, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of already figured out I wanted to head off and do something else and have my own business. So I felt like, right, I've done my years in advertising. Now it's time to do my own thing. And in order to do my own thing, and give it a chance of being successful, I wanted to do something I was passionate about. And I was passionate about nutrition. And one of the reasons I was passionate about nutrition was because I was always worked too hard. I always did too much exercise. It's kind of like I offset the hard work with too much exercise. Unsurprisingly, I got adrenal fatigue. So I found it hard to get up in the morning. It's having to have lots of caffeine and sugar to kind of keep me going. Not that I wanted it, but that's how I got through the day. So I fixed myself with food. And when I entered into nutritional therapy, 4-year course at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in Richmond, England, my specialist interest was always around stress, and it was always around aging well, because I felt like I was older than my years. I just felt, I look in the mirror and go, really, that's not fair. So there were two things that I was trying to basically fix for myself. And when I graduated, I was already well, so I was completely better from adrenal fatigue, but I've been left with some weight around my middle. So I got a cortisol tummy, as they call it, basically because of the stress hormones, just laying down fat around my middle. And I was also just, my energy levels weren't where they were supposed to be. I just felt like they needed fixing. So I was thinking, right, how am I going to sort myself out? But also at some point I want my own business. Where am I going to go with this? And I was just researching sort of my areas of interest, so stress and anti-aging, and it kept coming up with intermittent fasting. Like every which way I turned, it was intermittent fasting is the solution to all of your issues. And I was thinking, this sounds fantastic. And at that time, so this is probably about 7 or 8 years ago, there was some incredible science coming around about what the body is doing when it's fasting. The amount of papers being published every year was doubling year on year on year. And there was also another field that I sort of fell across, which was to do with things in nature, things in general, but things in nature was the bit that interested me, that sort of help your body do more of what it's trying to do during a fast. So how do compounds in nature get you into fasting mode? So those are two sort of things that I was really excited about from a research point of view. So I started just reading everything I could get my hands on, meeting with some of the professors, going to all the talks, and then thought, right, well, time for me to give it a go. So I started doing fasting myself, and I was hideous at it. So yeah, not the outcome I was expecting. I was still working in advertising, so I was still doing long days. But I thought, it shouldn't be this difficult. And okay, I got a few things to sort out. But when you look at fasting as something to solve obesity and diabetes and all these sorts of things, I hadn't got anything chronic like that going on. And I thought, well, if I'm struggling, and I'd convinced a few of my team to do it as well, because they heard me talking about fasting the whole time. And I'd got a couple of clients that were dabbling with it as well. And we were all saying the same thing. Theoretically, it's fantastic. The reality of this fitting with our lives just doesn't work. So for me, 4 o'clock was the time that it all showed up. I'd have like a grey face with like a white film over the front. And I had to go to client meetings. So, slapping on the makeup didn't make a difference. So I'd have to break my fast in order to look normal again, really. But it was also showing up in my energy as well, which I didn't like. So I just thought, look, there's something here. All the science is saying it's going to make me the right weight. It's going to sort my energy out. It's going to help me clean up my cells so I can age more effectively. This is what I want. Why can't I do it? There's got to be something in here. So I basically spent that 2 years looking to join the science up with the reality of fasting. So what can I create that's going to support somebody on a day-to-day basis, hit their goals day after day after day? And yeah, that's it. So
there's a launch of that. I mean, and you kind of launched really beautifully. Even some of your intro into your book talks about, your difficulty. And while I haven't spoken with everyone yet, and the goal is to one day, anyone who said the word fasting is going to have to sit with this. But I do believe that there is more frequently than not, the science behind it is there. The history is there, as your book mentioned, with Hippocrates, going all the way back to, if you will, one of the pillars of medicine or Western medicine. But I think that there is this kind of like, okay, I believe so devoutly in it. I'm going to go practice it. And people do tend to hit a wall and fast. It's funny you mentioned 4 p.m. I'm not sure if we get up at the same time, but that is still my worst hour, in any fasting, from OMAD to, multiple days, even as my relationship with it changes. And so I'm interested to climb through and see how you've rectified that for yourself, perhaps glean that knowledge from you. I do want to turn to unpacking the book because you've done this beautiful segue into it. I will tell you, after reading it this morning, and I told you this off the air and I'll say it again. So the name of the book is Intermittent Fasting for Beginners. And I am a stickler for a lot of books to be particularly the title to express the book itself. And this does exactly that. I found it to be one of the most succinct points for a new faster. And I think that, like with any other industry that's inundated with a lot of science and a lot of current science happening, you can just lose your first time reader or practitioner in any field. And yours, I was met with like this very generous and while also not, condescending tone of explaining fasting, explaining yourself a little bit throughout that. You start off kind of talking about the different kinds of fasts in a very succinct, multiple paragraph, not multiple chapters or way. You get into healthy lifestyle living, which I think a lot of fasting overlooks, particularly on YouTube. There are a lot of people that just say, when you break your fast, gorge. You get into breaking those things down. And you also have this, it's hard to have this interspersed dialogue with like ketosis and them, even that you talk about the Mediterranean diet and how all of these kind of communicate with the fasting industry without being too overly loquacious. And then you also get into the science behind fasting briefly in a succinct way. You turn towards the end of the book towards meal plans, breaking it down, recipes, what those things look like, the actual implementation, if you will. So I really do feel like it's a healthy living, it's a first time for fasters like moment. And it's a great overview. I'm wondering if you can speak to, given that I just summarized you, first of all, if you feel like that was a correct reception, if that's how you wanted your audience to receive the book, as I've received it this morning. And also, can you talk to us a little bit about why and how you structured it?
Sure. So I think the summary was brilliant. So very happy with that.
Oh,
I think the only tiny thing to add is really that this is about choice, and it's about giving people options on how to start, but also in a way that they can be assured is safe and is going to get them to the benefits they want. I think there's an awful lot of debate I hear out there about just dive in, do the longest fast you can think of. And, I have issue with that. Sometimes, depending on the personality, that can be quite a good starting point. For most people, it's not helpful. It's just too hard and their body's just going to go into stress, so shock, and not get the benefits they're looking for. The book was written in that format really just so that people can, within the first chapter, really understand enough about intermittent fasting just to have a point of view on it, just to decide, is this kind of the thing that I'm interested in? Shall I carry on, or is this not for me at all? But also it allows them to kind of go, even if fasting is not for them, creating breaks in eating is going to be for them. So even if you look at kind of who can't do fasting, and you fall into that category, chances are you can still get rid of snacking. So it's just I think what's nice about the opening section is it just allows people to kind of go, that's me. So they can continue reading the book sequentially like you did, or they can just go, right, I just want to read everything on 16:8. That's going to be the one for me. Mm-hmm. And just flick through a few pages, get started really quickly. And then if they struggle, they can go back and go, why is 4 o'clock a hard time for me? Oh, okay. That's potentially when I'm clicking over into burning fat. Maybe I didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe I was a little bit stressed yesterday. Something like that might be going on. And it's that sort of metabolic flexibility. It's that switching from burning sugar for fuel into burning fat for fuel that could be the piece that they need some support on just for a few weeks or a few months. And I give suggestions in the book on how they can do that. So for example, they could use fat, they could use compounds that support fasting. Off air, we talked about sodium. That can be really helpful around that time as well, if that's kind of the way your body's biochemistry works when you're fasting. So yeah, that.
Absolutely.
That's
And
that.
I wonder with the different terms you bring up, I've also noticed some that you kind of avoided, and I was hoping you could elaborate on chosen exclusions. First of all, just the overall topic. It is a book about intermittent fasting. Did you ever want to speak a little bit, or in the future, will you write more about extended fasting? And can you define for everyone listening who's first time to the world of fasting that I'm endeavoring to investigate here? Can you kind of give a succinct definition of what intermittent fasting is and why you chose to focus on that and not talk in addition to extended fasts?
So intermittent fasting literally means sometimes you intermittently eat and sometimes you intermittently fast. So have a meal, then have a break, have a meal, have a break. Now, the type of fast you follow, whether it is one meal a day, which literally is you have one meal a day at a set time, or it's to do with sort of following a set window of time. So I've completely lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. We were just talking. I asked too many questions at once. This is my issue. I'm too hungry at once. No, so what I was wondering is, why did you choose to only focus on intermittent fasting? Is it because it's a beginner's guide? And will you endeavor in the future to look at longer fasts, or are those not your forte?
Okay, so yes, it's a beginner's guide and intermittent fasting is easier than extended fasting. But more importantly for me, the science that's coming out now is for general health. So when we talk about things like weight loss, energy improvements, aging well, the short fasts pretty much do what the long fasts are doing. And also they're less stressful on the body. And I find the people who really need to integrate fasting the most are the ones that can't really cope with that much stress because maybe they're overweight or maybe they're working hard or whatever it is. So for me, I was never a massive fan of extended fast. There is a role for them, of course there is. If you're trying to do something with your immune system, or you've got a spiritual thing that you're working towards, then absolutely fine. But for me, for health and for people to get those everyday benefits of fasting, intermittent fasting does it, and it's more achievable than longer fasts.
Yeah.
That's why I've opted for.
So how are you defining longer fast? Is it anything past OMAD, which is called 1 meal a day? What's a longer fast for you?
So for me, anything over 48 hours is something I would question why somebody's doing that, especially if they're not supervised.
Okay.
And
do you get that from your
yeah.
science background, or is it just a personal definition?
No, it's science. So we do, in the book, we talk about alternate day fasting, which can take you up to around 36 hours. But there's been an awful lot written recently about don't do too long a fast, because actually for some people who don't really know what they're doing, all the stress stuff starts kicking in. It's just not a very helpful way to do fasting. And also with COVID, the longer fasts can adversely affect your immune system. So a lot of people are there's an awful lot of information out there right now that's saying the longer fasts, just don't do them yet. Don't do them while COVID is around. Wait until, we're in a safe environment again, and you don't need your immune system to be kind of ready to respond to a potential virus. So there's things to do with your immune system that are questionable, although it can be useful for certain immune system conditions later on.
And certainly they're doing scientific studies that are still kind of enumerating what, potential benefits and drawbacks it has at different points of view. Like all medicine, I think, as long as we view food and fasting as medicine, it's, it can be used to our detriment, like aspirin, if you will. I'm wondering, so looking at your company, because it has this beautiful narrative, obviously, I want you to kind of unpack, if you would, for everyone listening, nutritionistblend.com. You hit the website and you have this product on it called Fasting Plus Sticks. And I'm hoping you can kind of unpack what they are and why they were developed for everyone listening.
Sure. So just like the fact I focus on intermittent fasting for compliance reasons, the intermittent fasting sticks are also for compliance reasons. We want people to be able to achieve their fasting goals. So the biggest thing they do, so when customers have a Fasting Plus fasting stick, the biggest thing they feedback is, I just feel normal again. So there's no kind of caffeine or anything like that lifting them up. all that's happening is sort of signs of being grumpy, tired and hungry just go away within a few minutes. And the reason that's happening is those people that experience those symptoms tend to be dealing with some kind of leptin resistance or insulin resistance, and their body can't see the fat stores. So as they burn through all their sugar sources and they start moving over to fat burning, their body thinks it's starving, so starts throwing out these heavy reminders to eat, so hunger signals, or your mood goes off. So what these do is they've got fat in there, and fat is going to keep you going towards fat burning, and it's going to keep you going towards cellular repair, which is what your body's primarily doing during a fast. And because you've suddenly given it a fuel source to use that is helping you with the fast, all of those symptoms disappear. And then the other ingredients in the fasting sticks, they are all to do with fasting mimicry. So in simple terms, they are polyphenols. They're foods rich in these particular polyphenols that mimic fasting. Now, we always called them fasting mimics, but the reality is they don't go exactly down the same pathways of fasting. They go down complementary pathways of fasting. So they're recruiting these sort of separate pathways just so that you're getting into the modes of fasting more effectively and more deeply. So there's lots of offsetting that starts happening. So with the fasting sticks, all that's happening is you feel normal again, and behind the scenes you should be moving towards fasting, burning fat and intercellular repair. And all the science around that is to do with these molecules acting as messengers to get you into the right place.
Okay, and
does that make sense?
Yeah, and with your definition of fast mimicking, just to clarify some terms here for everyone listening, are you following the traditional definition by fast mimicry, or have you redefined that for the purpose of your own work?
So that term has changed quite a lot since I've been doing my research and since I've been developing products. So when I was looking into that whole field of science was really called sirtuins, and it was primarily to do with messengers that work with the sirtuin system, which is a bunch of genes basically that help with anti-aging and cellular repair, so autophagy primarily. So it started off there, but that term has sort of evolved, so it's got wider, basically because the compounds they were finding weren't necessarily working through the sirtuin enzymes. They potentially were working through a couple of other pathways, so they were interacting with something called AMPK and mTOR. So suddenly that sort of definition changed, and it became calorie restriction mimetic molecules. And that was basically because the scientific literature has been trying to unfold how to make fasting easier for years. And one way they thought they could make fasting easier, in terms of the benefits of fasting easier, was by having calorie restriction, so eating a few calories per day. So rather than fasting properly, so like sort of what the dictionary would say about fasting. So there was loads of science around calorie restriction. So those molecules started to fall within that group of science. But actually, it then changed again, because then the science around fasting and intermittent fasting got so much better. The reality is these things mimic what fasting is doing. They help and support what fasting is doing. So different journals are using different terms right now. So yeah, if any of the guys listening to this want to research it, anything to do with sirtuins, anything to do with fasting mimicking, and anything to do with calorie restriction mimetics, they're the three areas to look into.
Nice. So I'm wondering, you're located out of the UK, is that correct?
Yes.
How is the scene? Let's get into some of the social psychology within the fasting scene. I have kind of a narrow view of the West Coast of the United States and the United States kind of at large. And fasting has boomed here. I would say at least over the last 5 years, it's come into its own. It's out of toddlerhood, it's into adolescency as far as the knowledge base, and then internationally, it feels like it's changed. I was in Australia a few months ago. It feels like it's just beginning. Like there's just different pockets of things where it's beginning. Australia seems to have this awesome forefront on a lot of health and nutritional fads, but it doesn't necessarily seep into the general public. To put it succinctly, I don't terrify anyone in the United States when I mention fasting. It doesn't take them like completely off guard. And I think that in Australia, when I mentioned some people, they were like, yes, I practice it. Do you? And then others were like, what are you talking about? Are you ill? You know, I mean, there was like the two very defining lines. And so I'm wondering what camp England is in. Is it kind of this well-known, accepted, at least, um, studying science, or is it still kind of this yes or no category?
So brilliant question, actually, because it's something I struggled with when I launched the fasting sticks in June of 2018, so a couple of years ago. We are definitely behind the States, and especially LA. That's, you guys are well ahead of where we are over here. Because I've been researching it and I've been surrounding myself with lots of nutritionists and scientists, I felt that we were a couple of years ahead of where we were, and I was wrong. The people I was meeting in store who got what I was doing, they were American, or they were your group of Australians who actually were really into it and it was their hobby and part of their active lifestyle. They were biohackers, basically. In the UK, what happened was there are, out of Silicon Valley, out of, again, LA, you have quite a big biohacking community out there. You have lots of summits around biohacking, and that was starting to come into the UK, and they were the first real customers I had who thoroughly understood what I was doing, because they were very well versed in intermittent fasting. They knew what they were doing, but they were skeptical because they'd never heard of mimicking. So they were very much like, what are you talking about? This has got to be nonsense. And, but they were educated. So I shared the data with them and they liked it. So that was fine. But they're very, very niche. I'm in London, and that was a small community of people who were quite extreme, actually. They are viewed in all manners as quite extreme. The nutrition community was on board because, again, the science was there. So in the UK, the nutrition community was very open to it. So that was fantastic. And some of the more kind of open-minded doctors, they were starting to understand it as well. I mean, in terms of the general public, they thought I was... if they'd heard about it because they were reading like health and fitness magazines or something like that, then the question I was expecting them to do was, how do I integrate this with my routine? And the question I was getting was, I've heard of this, what should I be doing? And when I set out, I didn't want to be telling people what to do. I felt, they should choose what they want to do, and then I just help them do that better, more effectively for their lifestyle. So when we launched in June 2018, the market was nowhere near where I wanted it to be. But interestingly now, everyone's really open to it. Yeah. And you're finding that anyone in their 20s and 30s kind of knows about it, and they've decided if it's them or not. And they might choose to do it at some point, or they've just kind of gone, it's not for me. But now I'm getting a lot of people in their 50s and 60s actually saying, ooh, this has got me written all over it because it helps me age better. So it's definitely becoming more mainstream, but I'd say we're a good 4 years behind where you are.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, we're at the point where professional athletes are starting to employ it for cellular, healing and things of that nature, looking at like fast tracking injury and things like that. There's just so many different areas that it can be applied to. I just can't picture anyone other than a child in a growth phase that isn't, applicable to at least investigating it. And I like the idea of people walking around with the knowledge. It doesn't matter if you're utilizing it, just being able to open that dialogue. Hence this podcast. I'm wondering if there will be any future products on your site, or if there are any others that you would like to speak to that you're kind of looking at or endeavoring into.
So at the moment, I'm a tiny company, so it's all about the next batch of fasting sticks, but there's lots of NPD kind of going on behind the scenes. And what's at the center of that is two things. One, making intermittent fasting easier for people in terms of getting the benefits of intermittent fasting easier, because I've noticed actually people go, but is this strictly fasting? Well, yes, if you're looking at the benefit side. So it's very much about getting those benefits of fasting. And then it's also putting these compounds at the center of it, because every month new information is coming out about these compounds, and it's just getting more and more credible. So when I started researching it, I was looking at all of the original papers that were coming through, and then 2 years later they were all in reviews, and now it's like the next wave of stuff is starting to come through, and we're starting to see how those different compounds can be combined. And everything I'm doing is also going to be food based. So it's all about real ingredients. So organic or wild, or foods that you recognize the names of, or if you don't, they're still real foods. They're a berry, or they're a spice or something like that. And the reason for that is because this is such a new field. A lot of the issues is around bioavailability. So how well can the body actually utilize those compounds? So one of the things that's always taught in nutrition is Mother Nature knows best. So if you keep a food in its natural state, there are things that we haven't discovered yet in nature, that in science, that are there to help the absorption and those other things. So for example, apples are a classic. You know, we all went crazy on apple juice during our childhood years, and then actually it came to fruition. Actually, an apple in its natural state has got fiber that tempers the sugar hit you get from apple juice. So it's just it's such an early emerging part of the science that whatever I do will absolutely be based on real foods. It won't be in the supplement world. It won't be, it won't be about extracts of this and that. It's going to be something real.
Yeah. And I think that's what I really appreciated about your just dabbling, kind of sampling of like healthy lifestyle living in the book. You do tend to like kind of lean towards this whole food like moment and explain that in that way. And I do think it's crucial. There's a lot of people in the UK. In fact, I've interviewed quite a few that are having a very serious look at whole food, plant-based, sustainable start farming, eating seasonally, even though we can not, all of these different things. And so you're in good company with your fellow kin over there. And I agree with you. I think it all revolves, not eating ties in as much to what you're eating when you do eat. It's the other part of that, right? The yin and the yang. I'm curious, as we begin to wrap up our chat here today, have you had, obviously everyone over the COVID-19 pandemic that's struck this world has had interpersonal dialogue, particularly those who are based on nutrition and science, fasting and health. And I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit about any changes that have taken place with your knowledge or your desire and your goals in moving forward with your company or future works that you might do.
So in terms of the science around COVID, or in terms of the realities of living within COVID?
In terms of the reality and then the post-reality of this pandemic and how it's brought a lot of people's, everyone's become a little bit more thoughtful and things like that. And I'm wondering if it shifted your business at all. Will you be coming out with another book, or is it just kind of augmenting the knowledge you've already learned about being able to, increase the immune system and things of that nature?
I think it's augmented the knowledge. So for knowledge side, it's more about if someone came to me and said, okay, I want to use intermittent fasting, but I'm concerned about my immune system and COVID, how do I create a protocol that, excuse me, is going to give me a safety net rather than put me at risk? In terms of having one-on-ones with people, that would be something that we would talk about, whereas we may not have talked about that 6 months ago.
Right.
In terms of COVID, for me, it's been more around the reality of operating in a world where my factories are all closing. They've all had to furlough their staff. So basically the government's paying for them not to go to work. They've closed one factory, kept another one open. So they're prioritizing certain jobs. So it's more practically that it's affected the business. What I used to do was to see one-on-one clients, but I would never advertise it. So I would sort of get recommendations and referrals for clients, and I would do bespoke fasting plans for them. Because of COVID-19, I had to pivot slightly and offer up one-on-ones on the website as well. So that's kind of been a new part of the business that I'm now talking about, whereas before it was just happening, but not being advertised, I suppose.
Yeah. Will that influence
in terms of
future work that you do you think, all of these personal case studies that you're getting involved with?
It always did. So that's why I carried on seeing clients. I enjoyed it. I found it really rewarding. But also what was brilliant is because I'm no longer a beginner faster. I'm kind of gone through that phase now. It was brilliant to work with people who were still at that stage in their journey and work out where they were struggling. So just having customers say, or not customers, clients in this particular scenario, saying things like, I'm really struggling with constipation. What can I do? Or, you mentioned earlier the 4 o'clock thing being an issue. What's their particular issue? And And also with them coming into intermittent fasting fairly green, what questions have they got? Like, do they buy into the fact that they're allowed a small amount of fat during their fasting window? You know, if not, why not? And it's just understanding really genuinely what it's like to be a beginner or struggling with fasting. So that part's still really helpful for research anyway. But I will have more clients that I'll be speaking to now just because of COVID-19. I used to do an awful lot face-to-face, and I suppose now it's going to be more around Zoom. So practically that will change, which I'm sure everyone's saying.
Absolutely. Will you write another book, do you think, or is that far way off? You've just come out with this one, so it's kind of like asking if you're having another baby while you're in labor, but we'll do it anyway.
Funny you should say that. About a week ago, I was thinking I've really got to start writing down my notes. So at some point, yes, I would like to do something, and it will, the starting point will be something like intermittent fasting for intermediates, for example. So it will be something to do with people who've already got the basics down. How do we then, to use biohacking terms, hack fasting to make it more effective daily? Or how do we use certain compounds to do that? How do we make sure we're not doing too much fasting? Because I think that's an issue that happens when people get really into fasting, is suddenly they feel like rubbish, and you're kind of going, well, what's your protocol? How, what are you actually eating when you're eating? Are you getting the nutrients in? So it might be things that suggest things like the tests that people should be doing regularly, like a stress test or a blood test to check their nutrient levels, and just little things like that a lot of people, when they've been doing fasting for a while, they have different issues to a beginner. So for the fasting sticks, that's quite interesting. So a lot of my early clients were biohackers who were more advanced fasters, to be honest. And they were sort of saying, this isn't for me, but I use it with my sister, or I use it with my mum, or I give it to my friend or whatever, who's sort of new to it. About a year after we launched, they started going, I get the point of these now. Because even if you're actually really good at fasting, there will be days when you're struggling. There will be weeks when you've got a bit of jet lag, or you've got a new baby in the house or something like that. And the question is, should you stop fasting for that time? Or actually, could you manipulate your regime in a way to really help you out in those times? So something around that, I think, would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely concur. There's very little out there about that. They kind of stop once everyone says this is what it does, or people look at disease, and then it's, for the continued faster and the fasting lifestyle is absolutely less unearthed than the other. I look forward to that. And I want to say thank you so much for your time today, Amanda. I think it was a fascinating crawl through it, and I really do appreciate all of your wisdom and your candor.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, we've been speaking with Amanda Swaine. She's a nutritional therapist, a business owner, author, and fasting expert. You can find out more about her product, the Fasting Plus strips, as well as sticks, as well as more about her services on nutritionistblend.com. And thank you for giving us your time today. Until we speak again next time, remember to stay well, eat well when you do eat, and always bet on yourself. Sláinte.